Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to show you 10 steps of how I prepare for every single interview as a healthcare professional. I've had 3 clinical interviews and fortunately been offered positions for all of them. I remember stressing out when I was applying for a grad position, and I went to lots of workshops, did lots of research, so I hope this video helps you. I've set 3 different types of interviews. So I've had a graduate interview for a registered nurse and midwife position, a registered midwife interview for moving back home interstate, as well as a lactation consultant interview. Of course, depending on the different roles you apply for, the questions they're going to ask you are going to be slightly different, but the underlying concept of what you actually need to talk about and prepare for is very similar, because they're interviewing you. So us, as someone who's been being interviewed, our job is to market ourselves. So I think it's totally worth it to properly prepare for an interview and have a document there ready that you can refer back to again and again every time you apply for a new position. So let's quickly go through this list. Number 1, self-introduction. Nice and simple. Number 2, research the company or the hospital you're applying for and the values and understand it. Number 3, woman-centered care, what it means to you and give an example. Number 4 are your strengths. Number 5, how do you deal with conflict? Number 6, teamwork. 7, weaknesses. Number 8, clinical scenarios. So things like a PPH, neonatal resus, breastfeeding related questions. Number 9, do a mock interview, whether it's on YouTube or with your friend. And number 10, prepare 1 or 2 questions to ask at the end of the interview. So let's talk about the first 4 points. There's a reason why I didn't put strengths and weaknesses right next to each other. So self-introduction, value, women-centered care, and your strengths. It's very rare that people will ask you only one of these questions, such as, what are your strengths? Or just tell me about yourself. A lot of the time, because interviewers only give you 5 to 7 questions for your entire interview, they can give you quite long questions. So question 1 to 4 are usually asked in one question. So for example, when they ask you to introduce yourself, they will probably ask, tell me about yourself. Why did you pick midwifery? And what do you like about midwifery? And why did you apply for this hospital? So you can see they're asking you a bunch of different questions as your first question. They want to get to know you, but they also want to know whether your values align with the company's values. What are your strengths? What do you bring to the team? What makes you want to pick this hospital? So that's when you talk about their values. And why did you pick this profession? Which hopefully your answer is related to women-centered care. And also, what do you bring to the team? So they're really asking you for your strengths. So number 2, company's value. So when we research about company's value, it's usually very obvious on the website. It's very important if the company has quite a few values that you read through all of them and you try to describe what each of them mean to you in your own words. You don't have to memorize it. This part you can usually write down in a note, but it's important to know what they are and ideally have examples ready for all of them. A question specifically I got asked in one of my interviews is, which value or mission statement do you relate with the most? So in that question, they didn't give me any options to pick from. I needed to use the notes I had in front of me and then talk about it. So number 3, women-centered care. This should be pretty straightforward. We talk about it in our entire university study. Why do you pick midwifery? What is women-centered care? And give an example of women-centered care. Number 4, strengths. It's usually good to think about 2 to 3 different strengths and a scenario for each strength. You can definitely consider using the SEAL framework, which I'll elaborate in the next slide. So as you can see, I've written here, it is unlikely you'll be asked, what are your strengths? That's a very simple question. So therefore, you need to talk about the strengths and use these examples to answer other questions. So for example, if the question is, what do you bring to the team? They're really asking you, what are your strengths? So then that's when you can talk about your strengths and give a couple of examples. So the SEAL framework is a self-reflection tool for understanding and evaluating your experiences. It's also a good tool to quickly summarize what happened, what did you do, and what you've learned from it. So situation, effect, action, and learning. You can have a look at that in your own time. But it's a really good starting point if you're not sure how to talk about different scenarios. Number 5, how do you deal with conflict? It's okay to not have a certain experience or scenario for conflict, in my opinion, because if you don't really get into conflict, there's really not much to talk about. But it's really important to think about, if you were actually faced with a conflict, what would you do? So think about communication skills, listening skills, giving the other person respect, how to effectively communicate with someone. I've also found out that a lot of interviewers like it when you escalate the situation, because they could be a manager and they would want to know if you have a conflict with a coworker. Whereas we understand that from a coworker's perspective, you kind of want to sort it out between yourselves and avoid, throwing someone under the bus or escalating it or making it bigger of a deal than it is. But from an interviewer's perspective, they like it when you can escalate it and seek support. So escalate to your team leader or communicate with the midwife unit manager. So a particular example of an interview question about conflict that I've been asked before is, you receive a complaint from a patient about another midwife who's not performed observations all day and wanting to discharge home straight away. What would you do? So think back about the key skills of how you would resolve a conflict, and then you can apply it to this particular question that's been asked. So number 6 is teamwork. What do you bring to the team? What do you think is good teamwork? Give an example of good teamwork, an example of working well in the multidisciplinary team. So pretty straightforward. Think of a scenario. You can again use the SEAL framework. 7 is weaknesses. Usually when people ask you about your weaknesses, they will ask you questions such as, do you have any concerns about starting this role? What do you find challenging, or have you faced any challenges in your previous experience? Weaknesses, I don't think it gets asked often for a graduate position, but they can definitely ask you about challenges. So, brainstorm about what you find challenging and then you can talk about it. The most important thing about your weakness when you're answering the question is that they want to know your management, how you overcame the challenge and what you've learned from the experience. We don't really want to tell them, look, I'm bad at communication and that's it, and I'll try to work on it. It's going to be a lot more persuasive if you have an example of how you're working on your communication, just so you can demonstrate to the team that, you're a reflective thinker, you're constantly wanting to learn and be better. Number 8, clinical scenario. PPH, postpartum hemorrhage. Always study it. Study your local guideline, memorize it. If you can't memorize it, write it down or print it out, summarize it, write dot points. I think it's important to have quite an in-depth understanding. So memorizing what assessments you need to do, definitely call for help. The 4 T's, how you assess for it, where to get help. So some questions I've personally been asked before that are clinical scenarios are, an antenatal woman, 28 weeks or so, cleared PV loss this morning. What will be your management? Another one is, a mom is wanting to feed formula to a 4.2 kilo newborn as she thinks that the baby's hungry. What would you say to her? Another example is, a mother has breastfed for 3 days, decided she doesn't want to breastfeed anymore. What would you say to her? So these are just some examples. If you write that in Google, you can find like 20-30 questions. Number 9 is mock interview. So for me personally, I write everything down. So everything I've talked about in the last 8 slides, I've got like notes, I've got dot points and short paragraphs to help me answer each of those questions. So a mock interview was very useful for me because when I was reading through my notes, I felt like, I've memorized it, I know how to do it. And then when I asked my brother to ask me a question, I just got so awkward and I was stuttering and I didn't know where to begin. So I think it's so important to practice your responses out loud. Very realistic questions that you may be asked. There's a lot of these examples online. I'm also going to make a mock interview video. So if you would like to see that video, please subscribe and hopefully it helps you out. Personally, I would do the mock interviews first, and then once I'm more confident, practice with someone you trust. Next, keep it concise. Usually interviews go for 30 to 60 minutes, sometimes even shorter. So you want to talk to them about yourself and give them examples of different scenarios, but you don't want to take 10-15 minutes to answer the questions because they're just going to get really bored. Eye contact is so important. So if you're doing a face-to-face interview, give lots of eye contact. Just show them your warming, loving, smiley energy because at the end of the day, they are hiring someone to look after patients and someone to communicate with moms. So they would like someone who is friendly, approachable, and of course, someone who's professional. So you can show them that you're friendly and approachable by smiling and making eye contact. I think it's okay if you stutter, as long as you don't get super awkward. You try to, smile through it and just keep going. Lastly, you want to ask interviewers some questions just to show that you care. You can ask questions about, how many supernumerary shifts do you have? What kind of support do you have as a grad? When will I hear back about my result if you really don't have anything else to ask? So other tips, have a professional email address, as in is your first name dot middle name or just dot last name at gmail.com or whatever. Don't use an email address you've been using for years. It's good to have an email address that when people look at this email, they know that you're Amy Wen and they know which Amy you are. So my email address actually has like my entire full name in it. Number 2, be presentable. So if you really don't know what to wear, you can wear a plain colored white shirt or you can wear scrubs. A lot of the girls wear like a nice black dress for their interview that's not too short, so you can definitely consider that. I've only sat one in-person interview and I showed up in my uniform because I was in the middle of work and I was applying for a position in the same company, so that was nice and easy for me. Number 3, if it's online, make sure you have good lighting and good internet connection. Number 4, you can bring notes. So if it's a online interview, have your note open in front of you. Have 2 different screens if one screen is not enough. And make sure your note is right underneath your camera so that it's not so obvious like you're looking somewhere else. And if it's in person, you just show up with your notes and usually they let you bring it. Number 5, listen to the questions carefully. So they can ask you a question that's super long and there's many different components to this question and they want you to answer every part of that question. It's okay if you want them to repeat their question just so you know you haven't missed any parts of it. And it's okay to tell them, look, I can't think of an answer right now. Can we come back to this question later? I'm planning to make a couple more videos on this topic. This is the grad interviewing season. This video might be a tiny bit late for that, but hopefully it helps you. Don't give up. You can do it. If you can land an interview, do as much research as you can. There's lots of resources out there. Just practice, and you will land a job eventually. So good luck. Thank you for watching and all the best. Bye.